Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's call. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a few moments here. So hang tight and just give us about another minute. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon and welcome to today's University Council meeting and webinar. My name is Casey Murphy and I am ACTS Events and Programs Manager. Before I pass it over to our council chairs, I want to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, just to let you all know, you all are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or a problem hearing us, please hit the question mark sign to the left of your name and type in your question. I will do my best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going, but that would be the easiest method to use. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar panel, but please feel free to type in your question in the question mark sign as we go along, and we'll make sure to get them all answered at the end. I would also ask that you please note who the question is for. That will help us as well as we get to the end there to answer those questions. Finally, this session is being recorded, and I will have the recording up on the council homepage within about 24 hours after the presentation ends. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to Penny Menton, University Council Chair.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our quarterly University Council meeting and our exciting spotlight presentation today on something that's probably near and dear to all our hearts, the active transportation, e-bikes, and e-scooters. We have some fantastic panelists here today that are going to be sharing some invaluable information with us. But before we do that, I would like to introduce my Vice Chair, Stacy King, who is going to ask a few questions so we can kind of poll the audience and see where we all are for future. Stacy?
Thanks, Penny. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the call. I'm glad to see we have a lot of interest. So we're going to do kind of a lightning round of questions just to see where everybody is with some of these things. So we're going to give you just like 10 seconds to answer this first one. Which of these, quote unquote, disruptive expanding technologies have appeared on your campus, invited or not? Do you have dockless bikes, manual e-bikes, e-scooters, or none?
Okay, and I'm going to get that up there. I'll share it with everyone right now. Should be able to see it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to mention anything, Stacy, on it.
Yeah, okay, so we have e-scooters at 75%, manual bikes at 55%, e-bikes, dockless bikes at 30%, and none. Some of you don't have any, a quarter of you don't have any. So that's kind of interesting. Hopefully you'll glean some good information because they're probably coming at some point, right? So we'll go to the second question. So we have a couple of options here, but so for those of you who do have them or you're thinking about them or whatever, what would you consider the top 2 challenges or concerns that your department or your university or campus is facing regarding e-bikes and the scooters and dockless bikes that are coming? So take a moment and pick your top 2.
And I'm gonna go ahead and close that out here in just a second for you.
Okay, all right, so it looks like our top 2 winners are parking and safety, safety being the number 1, including where people should and shouldn't ride, crashes, or those sorts of concerns. So makes a lot of sense. And all right, so the last question that we have is, what steps have you
Stacy, you're cutting out a little bit here. I'm not sure where you are at the moment. If you could ask that question again. Stacy?
Campaigns, are you doing enforcement or, yeah. Yep.
Stacy, sorry, you're cutting out a lot and folks cannot hear you. If you, I don't know what line you're on, if you can get on a hard line as well.
Okay, sure, I'll call in. But yeah, pick all the options that apply.
Okay, there, we can hear you well now, whatever you're doing at the moment here. And I'll go ahead and close this one out.
Okay, so a lot of thinking still, a lot of still working on it. But the next one is written policy or plan. Okay, cool. That's great. It's good to know where we all are in this process. Thanks everyone. Okay, so now we'll go.
Yep, I'm gonna head over now to this next slide for you.
Okay, so I'm going to flip it back to Penny.
Okay, well, thank you guys for all participating in our lightning round poll. It certainly is a wide variety of experience, and some of us here that will be speaking today have already had the pleasure or distinction of having these new technologies hit our campuses. Our agenda for today is we have our panel discussion on e-scooters and dockless bikes and Uniwheels. Oh my, the wheels have definitely taken over and it's not just the car wheels anymore. So we are going to hear from various campuses on some approaches and best practices to help us all coexist with these emergency mobility options. We have 4 speakers here today. Beth Snoke from The Ohio State University, Clint Culpepper from Portland State University, Craig Cotton from Texas Tech University, and Suzanne Williams from University of North Carolina at Greensboro. We're going to start off our presentation with Beth from The Ohio State. Beth?
Good afternoon and good morning to some of you that are out west, lucky enough to be out west right now. It's freezing here. So keeping up with e-scooters, and it just literally here in Columbus happened overnight with what we call bird droppings. I don't know if that's a good term or not, but that's exactly what happened. And we were in talks at the time with Lime because we were sunsetting our existing bike share program at Ohio State, and we were interested in going with a dockless model. So we were working with Lime on an agreement at the time, and then Bird did come to Columbus, and we've been working closely with the city of Columbus ever since then on our programs. If you could go to the next slide. So I thought I would go over first what's working well, and exactly what I said, working with the city of Columbus has been wonderful. Our guidelines mirror each other for the most part. It's one seamless system, which is what we want to do as a smart city, to have that cross-section of mobility options available, because we are within the city of Columbus, and it makes it very easy for our students and staff and faculty to use scooters and bikes to go throughout the city. Some people live just outside the borders of the campus within the city limits, so this is a seamless system for them, and it's working very well. Detailed agreements with Bird and Lime. We made sure to have the same agreement pretty much verbatim with both organizations. They were the first two to approach the city about a pilot program, and they approached us basically at the same time, although we did go to Bird and ask them to do the same agreement that we had with Lime. The agreements, while the services are provided to us at no charge, what the agreement does is establish a basis for us to get performance metrics. We have access to their dashboard, which is wonderful to see how many pieces of equipment are on campus, the heavily used areas of campus. And basically, we can monitor how many pieces of equipment they have, because we do have limits set in our agreement with them of what we want to see on campus. Both have been both organizations, Bird and Lime, have been extremely helpful on game days. Game days at our university are a very big event, as you can imagine. Our Office of Homeland Security does not want scooters or bikes near the stadium. So both organizations have been cooperative in setting up a football corral for these devices, and we actually block out the area around the stadium so that they're not permitted or not supposed to park near those areas. So it's been wonderful, which leads into the last bullet. We have a very cooperative relationship with both. I can't say enough about both organizations. Anything that we have asked of them, they have done for us to help us and work with us. So we're very pleased to this point. Next slide. We did a one-year pilot program with both organizations, even though they signed at different times. The pilot officially ends July 25th. In that time, we will be able to collect data, learn what's working best and what things we want to avoid. And we are now in the process of working on an RFP that will go out shortly. Not thinking we're going to have just the one provider because both organizations are in the city. So we will probably allow for up to 2 organizations to, to award with the RFP. Next slide. Some lessons learned. We need to suggested parking locations, and what we want to do so that it's not real obtrusive is we want to save our bike racks for our public bikes. So we'll probably take and some paint and some signage and create preferred parking boxes for scooters and our bikes and our e-bikes. And that way we can hopefully keep them off of the disability ramps and some trees that we've seen that we've had problems with. Both organizations have been very responsive in taking those problem parking issues and moving those vehicles right away for us. But this is a way where we can hopefully control some of the parking and clean up campus. And I believe both organizations are willing to offer incentives for folks who do park in these locations. So because it is the winter season, we're not going to be taking the time or the money to paint those boxes in this season, but we will have them in spring. In the meantime, we'll probably use signage. As I said, we're going to do the RFP because what we didn't negotiate is any kind of fee that would come to campus for the equipment being on our campus. And I'm not sure what model we'll use, whether we're going to do it on a per ride basis or talk to each company about what would you be willing to contribute to the campus. And that money would be set aside to go toward mobility infrastructure, whether it's multi-use pathways, signage, signals, counting system, whatever it may be. And then finally, something that both companies are very willing to do is more rider education. We want to have more events on campus promoting the usage of helmets, distributing helmets to folks, the guidelines of not riding on the sidewalk. We do have guidelines established on campus, and I'll make reference to those later, but we really want to work with both companies to just kind of, if you will, shove education down the throats of these folks, because it is our biggest concern. Our student health center has seen quite an uptick in injuries, not necessarily vehicular conflicts, but hitting potholes, running into pedestrians, that type of thing. And those are the things we want to avoid. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little brief information on Lime, we actually launched with Lime on August 13th. For the scooters, we've had almost 171,000 rides as of yesterday, 122,000 miles traveled. The bikes, a little less used, but still trending very positive, 22,877 rides since August. And then our e-bikes just came to campus. We've only had them a month, and those are becoming very popular. And I think you'll see a big uptick in use of these e-bikes over the winter months when we don't have scooters really on campus very often. Next slide, please. For Bird, they actually signed our agreement on October 11th, so a couple months to the day almost from when we got Lime, but we still had 88,645 rides with Bird and 63,000, almost 64,000 miles traveled. Next slide, please. So in summary, if you combine the two scooter rides, over 234,000, total rides with all of the mobility options, 260, almost 261,000, and total miles ridden, 200,132. So we're very, very pleased. This the Dockless program certainly is trending above what we had with our docked program. And so definitely seeing a lot of use, especially I think more use with our faculty and staff than we saw with the docked program. So that's encouraging if we can just continue to work on our safety program. So you'll see the website, ttm.osu.edu/motorized scooter. That is where you can find a copy of the guidelines that we're using. Next phase of our program is to go forward with another marketing plan for more education, and then also getting some enforcement with the guidelines. The city has now passed code so that we are able to enforce scooter guidelines and make them more policies. So that, I think, is the next thing you will see on our end. I think we'll take questions at the end, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Beth. So our next speaker is Clint Culpepper from Portland State University. Clint?
Yeah. Do you mind, I made a couple of edits. Do you mind sharing or allowing me to share my screen?
Yeah. Should be doing it right now for you.
Perfect. There we go. All right. So Portland was one of the cities that played hardball a little bit with the scooter companies, and at least had the foresight to put something together before the launch occurred. I think that the scooter companies were a little bit frightened because when Uber came to town originally, they came kind of in violation of the codes that required licensing and insuring, and so the city council asked our police department to conduct some sting operations, and that ended up with Uber in court, and which ultimately ended in a profit sharing agreement that I think was ideal for the city to help regulate the market a little bit. So in light of that, the scooter companies knew that something was going to come if they just showed up and launched a scooter system with no previous conversations. So the city opened up a pilot project. It was 5 months long. It was something that regulated the number of scooters that were going to be in the city, what geographic areas they needed to serve, and also had some guidelines about placement of the scooters when they roll out in the mornings. I think it went fairly well. I would say as far as usage, it went extremely well. So it sounds like they've got nearly 700,000 trips that occurred in those 5 months. So the city is taking a 25-cent per trip surcharge there. So did raise quite a bit of money, a little over $100,000. We did have one of the 3 companies that came to town in violation of the agreement that they signed. They were fined $9,000, and that was related to the fact that they did not deploy scooters in the required geographic areas. And that was mostly put in to make sure that potentially underserved areas would still be included, that it wasn't just a placement strategy based on profit motives. So they, for the most part, 2 of the companies, Bird and Lime, did not run afoul of those, and they seem to be very good participants in the whole process. So that averages about 4,500 trips per day, which is pretty wild if you think about the number of scooters that were out there. I think they were averaging something like 8 trips per day. There was quite a bit of education that was done in regards to the rollout. So the graphic that you see here was something that our Bureau of Transportation provided. These were placed on the scooters. They were actual printouts that were attached to the scooters, and there was a requirement within each of the company's app to cover all of these things as well when the rentals occurred. We definitely saw some normal bad behavior, or not normal, but rather what everybody else has seen with scooters on the sidewalk. It is definitely the largest complaint of folks both using the scooters and not using the scooters, that there were just too many of them operating on the sidewalks, which by our state law is something that is not allowed. And official policy or official statements from our Bureau of Transportation have stated that that is the single issue that could potentially sink them coming back to town. So there will definitely be some additional education necessary and some additional messaging necessary if the scooter operators are allowed to come back. I think it will be contingent on kind of policing that behavior. And I think we'll see more technology come to help solve that problem. I would chalk this up to mostly most of these folks not being cyclists and potentially not often being pedestrians in the central city in the way that most of the folks that would be riding bikes or walking regularly throughout the city would know to stick to lower traffic streets or to stay in the bike lanes. And the fact that we saw them on the sidewalks leads me to think that a lot of those folks were tourists, as well as folks that were kind of exploring these modes for the first time and didn't really know the kind of standard participation, kind of unspoken rules about etiquette. We do also have a statewide helmet law that applies to scooters. We do not have it for bicycles, but it was written into our statewide codes that any electric scooter rider would need to wear a helmet. I'd imagine that we will see moves to repeal that, much like California just did. Now, here is the boring part for you. I know that there is a bunch of words there on the screen. This is our short electric scooter policy for our campus. Now, we did draft this and share it with all of the scooter operators before the pilot launch occurred so that they knew what to expect as far as how we were going to respond to it. We did want this to be a fairly open, fairly hands-off process because we wanted to see what the behavior was going to be like without a whole lot of regulation. So essentially, this policy is mostly a parking policy. Don't park the scooters in any place that essentially you wouldn't be able to park a bicycle. I think our problems here were pretty minimal, certainly compared to other cities and other even areas of our city. We did not see many problems at all. I would chalk this up mostly due to the fact that we have a substantial number of bicycle parking spots on campus, and they are all I would say fairly close to building entrances in ways that we generally don't hurt for close bike parking. And I think that the scooter operator or the scooter riders were pretty aware of what would be a normal acceptable place for them to park their scooters as they've been watching bicycles be parked in those areas for the last decade essentially. We did also mention that riders were going to need to comply with all state laws, which does include not riding on the sidewalk. And now we do have a few spaces on our campus that I would say are ambiguous as to whether or not they are a sidewalk. We don't disallow bicycle usage anywhere on our campus, so we don't have any big pedestrian thoroughfares that bicycles are banned. So we didn't want to make specific rules about scooters because, to be totally honest, I think we would have had folks asking us to ban bicycles in certain areas if we banned scooters. And that is, I think, a big reason that we also did not require specific parking spaces. We didn't have anywhere that was marked on the ground that it would be a place that scooters were supposed to be parked, mostly because as soon as I put those on the ground, I can imagine a flood of complaints about how folks parked their scooters someplace else. But as long as the scooters weren't parked in a way that would block access to any building or sidewalk, we let it go, and we were pretty happy with the results. Most of the both usage patterns that we saw and parking patterns that we saw were pretty predictable. The one thing that I could have never predicted was one specific use, and that was riding a scooter from class to one of our parking lots or parking garages to hop in your car. So as you notice on the top there, I mentioned electric scooters as the last 200-foot solution. Our campus is really quite compact. We are about 50 acres total. So to walk from one end of campus to the other is probably about a 6 or 7 minute walk. So most of these trips were ridiculously short. Most were actually up the ramps in the parking garages. So I think people just didn't want to walk upstairs, which is not something I ever could have predicted. Pretty hilarious to me, actually. Now we have a local company here in Portland called Ride Report, who does a ton of great work on bicycle trip reporting, as far as allowing riders to report unsafe conditions as they ride through the city. It's a passive ride tracker, but one thing that they expanded to quickly when scooters came to town was to create a dashboard for folks to look at to see where scooters were at the moment. You'll see this screenshot here. We have our university district is outlined, and now we can take a look at that, and we can look at how scooters are being used to come to and leave campus as well. So it's something that they have they've done a really good job, I think, of integrating their system with the scooter operators' APIs. And it does allow you to take a look at things like compliance. If you have an area of campus where scooters are not allowed, it's pretty easy for you to take a look and see if any behavior is occurring there. You can integrate trip data to show you origin, destination, route choices, things like that. If you wanted to contract with Ride Report and pay for the services that they provide, it's pretty awesome. We have not reached an agreement with them yet to explore that. We are kind of determining our needs moving forward. If scooters relaunch in the city, what type of data we're looking for. And so if we decide that we want some of that trip data, that we are looking for usage, we will likely contract with Ride Report to provide that. That way we're not relying on each of the scooter operators themselves to provide that data, and we would be able to look at it in real time, which would be great. One thing that we've talked about internally here at the university is how much time we spend kind of monitoring this and keeping an eye on it. And if we're having to do that, and there are private scooter operators out there that are turning a profit, we think it's only fair for those operators to share some of that revenue, similar to the way that the city has asked that they share that. We could potentially ask for something similar, maybe 10 cents per trip that starts or ends here on campus. And with that, we would at least be able to cover the costs of the time that we spend kind of monitoring it or watchdogging it. So we are kind of anxious to see what the city comes up with as far as whether or not we will see scooters relaunched. I feel like there are quite a few vocal supporters. We'll see if they outweigh the vocal opponents. And hopefully we'll end up with some better bicycle infrastructure in the long run because of the additional users that we see out there in the streets. So thank you. And if there are any questions, I look forward to answering them. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Clint. And just, Penny, before you introduce the next speaker, I just want to remind folks we are getting some questions in, which is awesome. Please just make sure you denote who your question is for as we go along, just because there are quite a few questions. I want to make sure that we get it to the appropriate person. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Casey. So our next presenter is Craig Cotton. He's from the Texas Tech University and has been dealing with us for a while. He and I've had many conversations. So, Craig, share with us what you have happening on your campus, please.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Penny. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So we've taken a little bit of a different approach than most universities. We were able to luckily stay kind of out ahead of the 8 ball. We went out to RFP about 6 or 7 months ago, and we originally went out to RFP actually for dockless bikes. The idea behind it was mainly public safety. So that we could, put in place and be under contractual obligations with our vendor as to, where the scooters are ridden, where they're parked, things of that nature. So we went out for an exclusivity contract, like I said, about 6 or 7 months ago. We, at the last second, actually, what our original plan is we were going to go out to dockless bikes and then phase in electric scooters. Well, that was right at the forefront of scooters hitting the ground nationwide, and then the scooter explosion happened, as everyone knows. So we decided we were going to go ahead and bump up that second phase to an earlier date. Well, Bird came in and they did the same thing that they did on Beth's campus. They came in and rogue dropped on our campus, even after emailing me and me explaining to them that they could not do that. They dropped anyway. So we bumped that scooter portion or phase up even further, and we actually started with scooters on our campus once we signed our contract. You can go to the next slide. So here's brief timeline. I've kind of gone over some of it. We went out to RFP. We selected the vendor last month. We executed the contract at the beginning of this month, and they put wheels on the ground on the 7th. That, as most people that work for the state knows, that's fairly quick. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so a couple of things we've really done well. We stayed in very close contact with the city of Lubbock in this entire process. Before we even went out to RFP, we sat down with them. We sat down with them and let them review our RFP before it went out. And we were also very involved in how they wrote their city ordinance concerning scooters. We landed at a great place for both the university and the city around us. No operator, no vendor can operate in the city of Lubbock without having a contract with one of the universities of higher education here in Lubbock. And no vendor can operate on campus without being in compliance with the city ordinances. So with all of that close communication, we were able to really end in a place that worked well for both the city and for us. It puts us in a state of a decent amount of regulation. One of the things that I think we've done well, we actually treat them just like we do bicycles. We allow them on sidewalks. We allow them anywhere a bicycle can go, which is just almost anywhere on campus. We do have some slight regulations concerning breezeways in the faces of buildings and external doors and things of that nature. But 95% of the sidewalks on campus, both scooters and bicycles, are allowed. We do have dismount zones on campus. Same thing will apply and does apply to the scooters currently on campus. They will not be allowed to ride in the dismount zones that we have in place. You can go next. Okay, one of the things we did wrong, we didn't even realize we were doing wrong until after we had done wrong. You can go back one. We have now found out and realized that a lot of the industry is trending more towards a permitting type model. When we signed our contract with Lime, they agreed to give us a $10,000 check. At the time, we thought we were pretty lucky to get a $10,000 check. Well, and speaking with some of my peers and colleagues at other universities, turns out a lot of universities are doing something very similar to what I think both of the other presenters before me mentioned, is going to a permitting process where, you know, you charge so much money per scooter per year. The University of Texas here in Texas has implemented, I don't know how much it is per vehicle, but it nets them $75,000 per vendor. The $10,000 check that we were happy to have held in comparison. It's one of the things when we go back out to contract renegotiation in a couple of years, we will actually approach it from a different angle. We're going to approach it from that permitting angle. And from speaking with my colleague there, Blanca at University of Texas, it didn't seem like Lime or Bird, either one, blinked an eye at that $75K a year. You know, they're making money hand over fist, and so $75,000 a year just to be able to operate is a pretty small change. You can go to the next one. Okay, so here are some of the numbers. We launched about midday on November 7th. We had the remainder of that day, you can see there, 1,283 rides. I didn't send you my updated PowerPoint. My apologies. I will get you updated numbers. So the top few numbers are correct. First full day of service on the 8th was 1,912 rides. The first full week of service, we had over 14,000 rides. And keep in mind, for the first full week, we only had around 200 scooters on campus. We are currently at 1,100 on campus. Our top day actually was yesterday, and yesterday we had 3,729 rides, and then since November 7th, we've had right at 40,000 rides, and 26,507 miles ridden. Lime actually was in town yesterday. Apparently we're the first university they've gotten into an exclusivity contract with. They've been having to compete with Bird and Jump and some of the other companies that are on the ground. So they came in and they're actually doing a case study with the university to find out, you know, exactly how and why we did what we did. You know, it's, you know, really what we told them was it was more of a preference thing, and it wasn't really it was, you know, there are other universities that may have thought about it, decided to do a pilot first instead of jumping straight into an RFP and contract. So that's where we're at with Lime. We are working with our grounds maintenance department we're going to install parking boxes like Beth was suggesting. We will put down some heavy duty adhesive tape initially to determine, make sure that the demand is where we think the demand is. Where we've identified hardscape, it's actually brick, and we're going to end up putting in white brick around the edges of this bricked hardscape to identify the areas, and then put up permanent signs once we've decided that the demand is where we expect it to be. But parking was probably the biggest issue, but we believe that the parking boxes will solve a lot of that. So I appreciate your time. That's all I got.
Thank you, Craig. We appreciate that. There's a lot of good information there. So our next presenter is Suzanne Williams, and she's from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and she's had a lot of experience with these stockless bikes and wheels as well. So Suzanne?
Thank you, Penny. I appreciate that. As you may know, UNC Greensboro was the first campus to partner with Lime for Bike Share. That was June of 2017. Next slide, please. We partnered with the city, sort of the campus piloted bike share and scooters first. We piloted it before the city, with the city's blessing and cooperation, but before the city went citywide with the program. We're both the city and campus were bronze bike friendly, to give you a sense of where we're at. Third largest city in the state, about 300,000 people. Our campus, there's about 20,000 students. A&T across town has 16,000 students. That's we're all working together, again, with the university piloting, but the city involved in the process. Next slide, please. So our timeline, we started with bikes June of 2017. By August, the program was going well enough and we'd worked out the kinks so that the city made it a citywide program. On our 1-year anniversary, we welcomed the Lime scooters on campus as a pilot program. We started really, really small with just 10 scooters. We upped that to 25, then 100. We were headed towards growing the program to around 200 scooters. That was sort of what we were thinking. And then this past August, Bird showed up, road launched 450 scooters downtown. Overnight, 100 Bird scooters appeared downtown, and within a few weeks, they were at 450 without any coordination or permission from the city at all. The city asked Bird to stop because both the city and campus have agreements with Lime, and we're very happy with Lime. Bird refused to stop, so the city eventually made the decision to impound the Bird scooters to get them to stop, because they wouldn't, they wouldn't, though the city asked them to. So interestingly, finally, just about 2 weeks ago, finally the City Department of Transportation did develop a scooter permit and present it to City Council. City Council deliberated. Ultimately, they approved the permit unanimously, though they did publicly at the City Council meeting. Several council members praised Lime for everything they had done in the city and the campus, working collaboratively with us, following all the city guidelines and requests. And the City Council members publicly criticized Bird for not doing that. So it was very interesting that happened at a City Council meeting. Next slide, please. So with the scooter permit, which I believe the permit deadline is coming up in a couple of weeks in December. So like right now we're sort of in limbo. The scooter permit application has been issued. The city is telling us that they anticipate issuing perhaps 2 or maybe even 3 permits to different scooter operators. That's what they're thinking. Each operator would pay a $500 permit fee plus $50 per scooter. That money would go to the city to support bike ped scooter projects. The permit specifies a minimum of 50 scooters per operator, but no more than 200 per operator. So Bird's 450 is not going to work here. Scooters primarily are encouraged to use bike lanes and to be in the streets, low speed streets up to 35 miles per hour. But scooters here in Greensboro are prohibited from being on the sidewalks, and they're actually prohibited between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. for safety reasons. And any operator that applies for a permit will be required to have local operations here, 24-hour customer service and data sharing. Right now, Lime meets those criteria. Bird has not yet. They rely solely on chargers. They don't have a local operations team here, so they're not currently in compliance, and they haven't shared very much data with the city and no data with the campus. So currently they're not in compliance, but if they're gonna follow the permit, then they would have to be. Next slide, please. So just looking at numbers, with the bike program has been operating for 18 months. and again, very, very well. We're a little bit smaller campus than the others, so maybe our numbers aren't quite as impressive, but for us, we're quite happy with those numbers. Much, much more robust than nearby sister cities that have dock-based systems. With the Lime scooters, we only got up to 130 Lime scooters before the city called for a moratorium on scooters to give them time to develop the permit because of Bird's rogue launch. Up until that rogue launch, both the city and campus were very, very happy with the Lime scooter pilot test that we had on campus, and we were inching towards a city permit anyway, but the Bird rogue launch just sort of escalated that timeline. With the Bird scooters, all that Bird has shared with the city is the number of unique riders. They have not shared any other data, though they say once they have an agreement and a permit that they will do so later. Next slide, please. So I just want to end by showing this. This is a heat map provided to the city by Lime, showing with the bikes and scooters combined the impact of having that extra mobility option for our residents. The three biggest activity centers are UNCG, the downtown central business district in the middle, and A&T University to the right, to the east. Those are the three primary locations where you see the most number of bikes and where you saw scooters before the moratorium to get the permit in order. But as you can see, the entire city has benefited. It's in terms of enhanced mobility and last mile, first mile, last mile connectivity. It's really had quite an impact on the city for the positive. Parking has really been a very minimal issue. Safety is more of a concern, and during our pilot, we were focusing on safety messages, videos, tabling, those sorts of activities to try to get the word out. Getting students to be peer educators seems pretty effective, more effective than me tabling personally, though I'm happy to do it. As we move forward and once the city issues permits and we see who we're working with, safety will continue to be important to us. We'll certainly ask each of the operators to contribute to that effort in terms of providing helmets and safety education and awareness. But overall, it's been a very positive thing in Greensboro. We just not so happy with Bird on the rogue launch, and I'm hoping if they do get a permit that situation will improve. And that's what I've got to share.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And also I want to thank Bess, Clint, Craig, and Suzanne again for these impressive presentations. This technology is definitely new to all of us, whether we are members of ACT or people that are in practitioners that have joined to try to understand this new emerging mobility. I want to take some time for questions, but I do want to wrap up with going back to the polling. Parking safety seems to be very hot issues, and so we're going to play for you a short video that UCLA did, because we've had all of this experience as well. So the unifying message is we're all in this together, and then we'll take questions for a few minutes so we can garner more information, so as we go forward in our ACT conferences and events in the future, we can make this an ongoing conversation. Stacy? Okay, so we hope that we can respond to some of the questions that are being asked by all of you, of our panelists.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and help get that started for you, Penny, here.
Great. Thanks,
Some of these questions, you're welcome. Some of these questions, just for the panelists to know, are general, and I will try to denote them as we go along here. But for the first one, Beth, you did have a question. A couple folks were wanting to know how many scooters, bikes, and e-bikes did you have on campus for both Lime and Bird?
Thank you, Casey. Yeah, we had, I believe we started out with 25 scooters for each. And during football season, and when the whole movement caught on, they just couldn't keep up. They were averaging about 20 rides per scooter per day. So we did increase that number. And on game days, especially, we let them have, I believe it was 50 to 75 each. We have noticed as of yesterday that there were well over the number that were permitted on campus. So we did get in touch with one of the providers and asked them to remove some of them because they were just too many, and we had snow, and we don't want them blocking the sidewalks as our plowing folks are out there trying to do their job. Bikes, I think we were allowing up to 200. We had, with our initial provider, I think we had about 125 or 50, but we did go up to 200, and that's a combination of regular pedal bike and e-bike. And we're going to watch those volumes as well, especially when spring comes back.
Okay, great. Thank you. This next question is for Clint. Clint is kind of a two-part. We had a couple people were intrigued by this a little bit. We saw that in your PSU policy, you were stating that if scooters were parked inappropriately, they would be confiscated by your parking office. Did you ever, in fact, confiscate any? And second part to that, someone wanted to know, is there a fine for a company wanting to recover a scooter from impound?
Yeah, can you hear me? We did confiscate some. We not for parking incorrectly. For those, I simply took a photo and moved it into a space that would be appropriate. We didn't look at fining the companies. I would not be opposed to that at all. I would be happy to do that, but the ones that I impounded were ones that were either disabled or otherwise were not moving. And then I simply emailed our contacts at the companies and had them come pick them up from my office. We did see some on campus just this week, even though the pilot project is closed, which was a little bit strange, right? We shouldn't see any scooters out on the street. They should all be collected by now. They've had a good week and a half to pick those up. But it sounds like from the scooter companies that some folks put the scooters in their garage hoping to keep them forever, realized that they were kind of immobile and are now putting them back out on the streets. So we're thinking that's what happened, was that somebody possibly had a couple in their dorm room and then put them back out on the street like Monday morning. So I'd imagine we'll see a handful like that in the next couple of weeks. But I think if we did decide that we were going to fine the companies for the behavior, we would have to standardize that. You know, we have a document that includes all fines and fees for our department that has to be approved and updated yearly. We would look into putting an actual fine in there so that it is codified, so that we would have some recourse there. At this point, I don't know whether we would actually get away with fining a company until we get those standardized. But we might put it in there, and we might include that in any contract that we signed with any of the scooter operators.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. And This next question came up while you were speaking, Clint, but I think it can be addressed by most of the panelists here if anyone wants to chime in. But does the scooter trip data allow you to see which mode of travel it replaced? And for example, how many car trips did they eliminate, or does it mostly replace walking trips?
My thought is that it is typically replacing walking trips. We'll know more as I think the data is analyzed a little bit more. Our Bureau of Transportation is going to do an analysis of that. On campus, I think it only replaced walking trips, but without looking at that further, it would be tough. Like I mentioned with Ride Report, I think that we would be able to determine that based on trip length would be one way. You know, we can plot out the typical, we kind of know the threshold of how far somebody's willing to walk to campus. And if it was below that distance, then we would know that it was essentially replacing a walking trip. If it was longer than that, we could consider that a typical commute. But we will be doing a survey that will go out in the next couple of weeks to our campus about scooter use. One, we want to get some opinions on folks that are not scooter users about how they feel, but then also we want to get some usage data from actual users about what those scooter trips replaced. I think it's going to be a mix, but my strong feeling is that we're just replacing walking trips.
This is Suzanne in Greensboro. It is replacing on our campus some walking trips, but it's also replacing for us car trips, especially amongst faculty and staff that sometimes are tempted to walk to meetings or to go off campus for lunch. Amongst the faculty and staff, they're using the scooters, replacing car trips and some walking trips, but that's what we're seeing here.
Excellent. Anyone else? No? Okay. This next question again popped up, you know, in between here, Clint and Craig, and anyone else can jump in as well. What is the amount of profit sharing that will need to be asked for determined in terms of the scooters?
Well, here at Tech, this has exploded so quickly that we actually kind of hurt ourselves by being ahead of the game. But we get a 20% profit sharing from the pedal bikes. We don't get a profit share from the scooters themselves. Again, going back to my presentation, once we have fulfilled this contract, we will, in our contract renegotiations, we'll kind of change how we approach that and go more towards a permitting type system.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think we would have to do an analysis of what it costs to essentially administer it. I don't think we're looking to turn a profit on this. I think that mostly we're looking to cover our costs. You know, a lot of the data that we can get from Ride Report is free. If we do pay for that service, you know, we'd at least want to be able to cover the cost of that and maybe the cost of what our analysis, you know, as far as employee hours looks like. One big part of that is if we did pay for the kind of more robust service from Ride Report, we would look to analyze that in an academic way as well, and I think there's some opportunities there that, you know, we would receive a benefit that's kind of non-financial. But looking at what Craig was talking about as a percentage, that seems appealing. Also, the simplicity of a per ride fee is pretty nice because it's easy to look at and kind of know whether everybody's above board on that.
Okay, great. Penny, we do have quite a few questions that I know we're hitting that 2 o'clock hour here for us on East Coast. Did you want me to keep asking questions, or should we try to ask folks to maybe kind of connect with some of these panelists later on?
I think that perhaps we can connect with them. We can also send the questions to Stacy and I, and we'll help field them. This has certainly been a topic that's explosive with this technology, and I think it's something that we all should consider having a further conversation in the future. There's a couple of opportunities for us. The Emerging Mobility Summit, which I believe will be in Austin in April 16th and 17th. So hopefully many of you can attend that. We could also plan to maybe have a call-in webinar as well, Casey, to follow up on this. And then
absolutely, we can.
Okay, and then there's the national conference in New York as well. So Stacy, you and I can probably take those questions and field them. And any of the panelists, you're all right with us also sending them to you, or you want to try to even make a follow-up conference call for specifics, if everybody's willing? Beth, Clint, Craig, Suzanne, does that work for you guys?
Sure does.
Yeah, sounds good.
Works great.
I think that this is definitely not the end of the discussion. It's just the beginning. This is definitely explosive across the country. We've had our own share of all of these kinds of things you've heard about today. So thank you. Thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you again to all that have attended. I have a few updates that are also important to us as universities and colleges of education, higher education. We have UBIT, and many of you may have received the update from ACT. We've been working on this for a long time now, and we hope we're making some traction. We do know that last week there was it was introduced into the House and Congress to see if there could be delays for 2019, 2020. On UBIT, 2018 looked like we would still have to pay, but it was hopeful. And then as of last night, as part of the manager's package, Kevin Brady introduced the actual repeal of it, which would make us all be the best holiday present ever. David might have more to say about that as well. The 2019 federal commuter benefits also going to be increased to $265 a month, so I wanted to let you know that. We are working on our annual work plan. We want as many people to be involved with their ideas, thoughts, solutions, programs, whatever is happening in your world is definitely important to us, so please send Stacy or I an email or see us at one of the ACT events, and we will connect and get you more involved. We will be working on our work plan, and you'll see our council planning. Thank you to all of the people, Dave, Aaron, Gary, Dan, Stacy, and as you can see, to all of you, and there's more than one share or scooter, and it can be dockless. You can go from campus to campus or event to event. So we're hoping you join us and keep the conversations going. Any last questions before I turn it over to David?
Yeah, Penny, thank you so much. And just to add on the UBIT piece, you know, please take a look at the information that was just sent out. It's brief. You know, we feel good about House passage. Senate's probably going to be a bit tougher, and then it has to get rolled into the overall tax extenders package, which is going to have a tougher time going through. But it does lay a good foundation for us as we head into the new year with trying to seek repeal of the unexempt organizations. We will be releasing a survey next week to build upon the one that we've done in the spring. Trying to gather understanding from exempt organizations about the impacts that the UBIT change has had on your transit benefit program. If organizations, the universities on the call could take a few minutes to just kind of let us know what is taking place at your schools, your organizations, that would help us out. All the information will be aggregated. We're not going to be identifying any schools by name as we compile the information. But will help us tremendously as we continue to have meetings in the new year with Congress Democrats are, taking over the House, and they promise to be looking deeply at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act bill, and we think the UBIT piece definitely has the bipartisan support to get some changes made to it. So any info we can collect from everyone would be greatly appreciated. And then just kind of echoing on some of Penny's comments, encouraging folks to really get engaged in the council. It's a great opportunity to have the focused conversations around TDM within the university setting. There's a lot that can be taking place, some good topics of discussion, and we hope that everyone will look to get involved, share ideas for conference sessions. The council does get 2 dedicated sessions at the international conference, so take advantage of those to have some continued discussions on areas of interest. And then just from a broader ACT national level, earlier this week we opened up nominations for letters of interest to participate in national board committees. So if you do have an interest in participating on a national level, helping develop policies and program ideas and kind of overall vision for ACT moving into the future, please take a look at that email that went out and feel free to submit interest in serving on a national board committee. And hope to see all of you at our future events. And for those that are non-members on the call, you'll probably be receiving a note from us shortly, encouraging you to join ACT or renew your membership in ACT. And we look forward to having you part of our community.
Great. Thank you, David. And once again, thank you all. Please keep the conversation going. No question is too small or discussion too big to have around this subject. We've been talking about first mile, last mile for a long period of time, and now it's here, maybe not in what we thought it was going to be, but it is here. And I know for many of us, it has gotten people out of their cars, out of ride hailing. So if you have thoughts and ideas, please join us for our next quarterly session and keep the conversation going.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.